So beautiful, choir. Thank you for that music. I know that I am feeling loved in this moment and feeling that anticipation of sharing a story with you about a time that I was loved in church. I've found that love in a community feels different than romantic love, family love, the love I feel for the natural world, and the love that I feel the natural world has for me. So I have a story about being loved in community back in my 20s when I first started attending a Unitarian Universalist church. Now, I didn't grow up going to church, and honestly, when I found my way into a congregation in my 20s, I was a little bit embarrassed to be there. I used to tell my non-church-going friends that I was simply busy on Sunday mornings. But I did keep finding myself drawn to the Unitarian Society of Germantown in Philadelphia. That's where I moved after I was finished with college. And I was not committed to church going. I didn't know if I belonged there, and I wasn't sure that I would keep belonging with my mostly queer set of friends if I went to a church. A few weeks into semi-regular attendance, I had gotten the hang of what happened on a Sunday morning. I knew that we started service with a hymn, that in the middle there was Spirit of Life, number 123 in the hymn book. There would be a sermon, and then another hymn at the end. Okay, I could do that. What I had not gotten the hang of was what happened after church. The cacophony of people all greeting one another, children coming back from their religious education programs, a mysterious fellowship hall that I hadn't figured out where it was yet. It was too much for me, too fast, too soon, and my usual response was to exit out the front doors the same way I came in. Until this one Sunday. Before I could jet, Peter Walsh turned around in the pew and said, "You have a lovely singing voice." Well, a conversation ensued, and soon he asked, "Have you considered joining the choir?" Until Peter had asked, honestly, I hadn't considered joining the choir. But once he asked, I thought, yes. And all of a sudden, the words yes came out of my mouth. And next, Peter was inviting me to meet the choir director. When? Right then, right now. Well, I found myself winding through that cacophonous crowd of people up the stairs to the choir loft, having no idea what I had just gotten myself into, but feeling safe and spontaneous and curious. So on that Sunday, I still exited out the front doors, but this time I left with an invitation to return that Thursday night for choir rehearsal. 17 years ago, Peter Walsh taught me about belonging in a community. His was a generous act, a loving act. It wasn't a romantic love or even a friendship love, but it was an act of the heart. It was Peter offering something that mattered in his heart to my heart, his church home. Peter knew that by my attending service, part of me was willing to make this place my home, my church. And I was not going to forever be a visitor or a guest in his church. So in extending that invitation to join choir, he was imagining the possibility of our church, the one where we both sang in the choir, the one where we both belonged. In the last 2.5 years, we've felt that bond of community, the bond of covenant, the bond of belonging stretched and bent by the pandemic. We were forced to stop many of our habits of belonging to a church, of belonging to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Nashua. So, as we gather here in the sanctuary for water communion last week for the first time in 2.5 years, let us expect this to be a year of recreating community and recreating covenant. And let's expect that this process is not going to fit like a glove right away. I would say this glove has been through the wash a few times. We're going to have to figure out a new fit. Because let's face it, we've been through the wash. Our families have, our neighbors have, and our children have. We no longer fit where we were 2.5 years ago. We no longer fit where we fit in the Zoom box last year. And many of us, myself included, definitely don't fit into the pants we wore 2.5 years ago. We are all figuring out new habits of participation, and in that, we are figuring out new belonging. The pandemic taught us ways to belong in a church community online. We now know that church doesn't only happen here at 58 Lowell Street, and yet this is our physical home. Many of us longed through the pandemic to be here in this space, to be in our church. And last week, over 75 people joined us in person to celebrate water communion. This space, this home matters to our community. This sanctuary, this very building that we're in, is approaching its 200th birthday in the year 2026. Our ancestors drew a circle that included us when they laid the building stones for this building's foundation. And this fall, you will be invited by the Board of Trustees and the Building Our Vision team to take the next step regarding the future of this sanctuary, our parish house, our education building, and the grounds of the UU Church of Nashua. To ask the question, how might we recreate these spaces for future generations? How might we renew this building, these buildings, to reflect our values now? These questions take thought and they take resources. A team of you has stewarded a process that started back in 2018 when this congregation began setting a long-range plan for its future. Earlier this year, an architect was hired by the team, and a number of you met with them in late spring and over the summer in working groups. And in the words of your Board of Trustees President, Brenna Woods, quote, "This fall and winter, the process of discernment and dreaming will be wrapping up. It's time to consider the options and look ahead. With lots of input from 5 working groups, the Building Our Vision team has developed a list of possibilities. I hope that you will stay after church today to attend the Building Our Vision update here in the sanctuary and on Zoom. And there you can hear much more from the team, the architects, and ask questions about possible plans to recreate this church space for future generations. Just like those who came before us, we are remaking, recreating this church community. My hope for this year is that this community can draw the circle wide, that we not fear how the pandemic has changed us, but embrace that who we are today is who makes the community we will be tomorrow. Let us choose love. I invite you to join me in a litany, and I'm going to invite Pat and Danielle to lead it with me from down on the floor so we can all be together. For each refrain from today's worship leaders, I ask those gathered to invite you to respond aloud with the words, "No one is outside the circle of love." We know that hurt moves through the world, perpetuated by action, inaction, and indifference. Our values call us to live in the reality of the heartbreak of our world, remembering that no one is outside the circle of love.
We who are Unitarian Universalists not only affirm the inherent worth and dignity of every person, we also affirm the inherent wholeness of every being, despite apparent brokenness. No one is outside the circle of love.
We know that things break or break down. Promises, friendship, sobriety, hope, communication. This breaking happens because our human hearts and our very institutions are frail and imperfect. We make mistakes. Life is messy.
No one is outside the circle of love.
With compassion as our guide, we seek the well-being of all people. We seek to dismantle systems of oppression that undermine our collective humanity. We believe that we're here to guide one another toward love.
No one is outside the circle of love. No matter how fractured we are or once were, we can make whole people of ourselves. We are whole at our core, always, because of the great, unnameable, and sometimes inconceivable love in which we live. No one is outside the circle of love. So I invite you to please join in body or spirit in singing our closing hymn, Sanctuary.